Hey, what's going on, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. This is KDK coming back with another review. Today, we're going to go back to the Micro Center Atari 3/4 scale arcade cabinet. Again, this is from Micro Center. At the time, it cost about 600 bucks. But in today's video, I'm going to show you how to properly map a console to this arcade unit so you can map all of your buttons correctly. Now, there are a couple of different ways to do it, but in today's video, I want to go ahead and map these buttons manually according to the arcade stick encoder. Now, we will be using a Cronusmax, which will plug into the Xbox 360. And the reason why we're using a Cronusmax is because the Zenmo controller, which comes with this package, however, does not allow you to plug in two controllers and take advantage of the Xbox 360. Now, in order to make this happen, you need the Zenmo controller, which it comes with, but you need to break them off. With this package, you get the Zenmo controller and both sides plug in directly to the encoder and breaks off into one USB port. We don't want to do that. We can't have that happen because it won't allow you to mod it correctly that way to the Xbox 360 or any console for that matter. They have to have their own separate encoder boards. So I purchased one on eBay, had it shipped to me. As you can see here, this is just a standard arcade encoder, and we're going to map the buttons manually to the respective buttons on the encoder. So that way I know exactly where they're mapped off. Now, there are a couple ways to do this. You can map it however you want to on the encoder board and then use the cronuszen to tell the buttons how you want to personally configure it. For those of you who are familiar with the cronuszen and Cronusmax, these are adaptive controllers that you typically use for Call of Duty or arcade modding in this nature. And then, of course, you can also program rapid firing or do whatever the heck you want with it. I mean, these devices have an abundant amount of uses, but I want to go ahead and map these buttons accordingly to where they should be on the unit. And let's go ahead and take a look on the inside. I have an Xbox 360 authorized manufactured controller at the bottom, and then of course we have my Cronusmax on the first side, but we want to go ahead and map the buttons on the second side now and go ahead and get those configured correctly. Now, for the sake of this video, at the time I only had one Cronusmax. I will be using that one to swap back and forth, and you obviously need a original wired Xbox 360 controller to authorize the controller to get it to work. So let's go ahead and get into this. I'll walk you guys through the process. Obviously, a lot of you guys are probably familiar with this a little bit, but for those of you who are new to the Atari Micro Center cabinet and want to use something a little bit more than a Raspberry Pi, or if you want to use a console, then definitely this video is for you. You know what time it is? Let's get started. So in order to get started, there are a few things you will need for this quick mod. First, you will need a Cronusmax, which you can purchase online for about a good 70 bucks, maybe 40 bucks or so. You will also need an official Xbox 360 wired controller for authentication purposes. You need two controllers. You cannot use the same controller to authenticate on both sides. It just won't work, and it'll freeze up the system because it'll make the system think, or make the Xbox 360 think, that it is the same controller being plugged into the unit. And that will cause the system to lock up, so you don't want to do that. The next thing you definitely want to have is an extension cable. Now, my Xbox 360 is at the bottom of this unit, so I have an extension cable running to the top, so it's just a quick snap in and plug in every time I power on the unit. It's really quick, really easy. It's not a hassle at all. The second thing you will need, obviously, you will need to have a new arcade encoder for the right-hand side. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to pull up a game, Marvel vs. Capcom 2. I would also suggest another game such as Street Fighter, so that way you can see exactly how your buttons are mapped according to the Xbox 360. Now, if you guys are wondering why do I want to do that, Again, you could go through the encoder, you could plug in the buttons however you want to, and then kind of figure it out a little bit later. But again, I want my A button to be the red button. I want my B button to be next to it. I want my left and right button to be at the top and the bottom on the far right. And then I want my X and Y button to be directly above the A and the B button, so I know exactly where they are without having to look at any games. So we're gonna go ahead and configure it that way. Now, the cool thing about games like Marvel vs. Capcom 2 on your Xbox 360, Street Fighter, if you have that, it gives you the diagram layout so you can see which buttons you're pressing, which will correspond directly to the button that you're pressing. So we're gonna go ahead and get that set up right now, and I'll walk you guys through this quick process. So the first thing I definitely want to do is make sure that all of my connections are secure. I'm going to go ahead and plug in some of these buttons directly into the arcade encoder. Now, before I install them, what I'm going to do is press on each button, see where it aligns along the encoder, and see how it responds to my Marvel vs. Capcom 2 game. Again, you can pick any type of game. This is just the way that I do it because I want my buttons to be mapped from left to right. At the top, I want it to be X, Y, and from left to right, I want it to be X, Y, and L. And on the bottom, we're going to have the red button is going to be A, the middle button on the bottom is going to be B, and the button on the far right on the end is going to be the letter R. It makes things really simple this way because before you even attach the button itself to the actual button on the arcade deck, you get a chance to see which buttons are corresponding with what position. So we want to go ahead and take care of that before we get the buttons fully assembled. Now, I'm going to start at the top first because it's a little easier to work that way, and then we're going to move on to the bottom because that way it gives us a little bit more room to work. So again, we're going to go X, Y, and L, and at the bottom is going to be A, B, and R. That's the way that I map it. I found it to be a lot easier that way. And then of course, we're going to move along the encoder board and get everything fully installed. All right, so we have our letter X installed. As you can see here, it's already mapped out on the diagram. And again, this is how I'm mapping out myself. So you can see if I wanted light kick to be X, there's the X button right there. So if I want to unassign it, just press this button, and then X moves down there. All right, so let's go ahead and move to the next portion of the encoder board. We'll play around with these and get the rest of the buttons installed. All right, first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and plug it into the encoder board. So far we have X, A, and B. So which button is this? So I'm going to move to an unassigned or a light kick there on the Xbox 360, and it gives us Y. So we have we have X, A, B, and Y. So I want my Y button to be directly at the top. But before I do that, let's go ahead and get B installed really quick. You know, in fact, I'll go ahead and install Y since it's right above it. Yeah, make sure you have these on tight and secure. Sometimes they'll slip off. I don't like to tighten them down too much because if I ever want to remove it, I just like to have that additional option. And let me see if I think I got this backwards. All right. So now we have Y in there. Let's go ahead and install B, which is still dangling right here in front of us. And this will just be a quick pop in. So now we move to the next few inputs on the encoder board. And this particular input that is right underneath the B option is the left button. So we have the left button followed by the right button. So far from going down from top to bottom, on the encoder board. In fact, let me move the camera a little closer so you guys can see it. We have X, A, B, Y, left button, and now we have the right button. So let's go ahead and get these plugged in, and we've already tested it against our Marvel vs. Capcom 2 game to see if we are clicking the right button. As you can see, you have the left button there. So let's go ahead and get that installed on the corresponding button we want to go ahead and set that up with. There we go. I think I'll turn this around. All right, so now we have the left button, and then of course now we're going to go ahead and plug in our right button. All right, so because of the uniqueness of the encoder board and because we have additional buttons, I'm going to play around with this for a little bit and find out what other buttons do I need to sync up with this. Obviously, there's 12 buttons here, but the only problem is you know, Xbox has a guide button and it also has a back button and start. So we want to make sure we go ahead and associate those properly. However, I really don't have anything here to really test it against because as you can see, you don't get corresponding buttons for back, guide, or start, but the guide button should pop up. Now, you really don't need that if you're trying to map this out for an Xbox 360 or an Xbox One. Pretty much the A button kind of uses or constitutes as your natural start button for everything. But we're gonna go ahead and figure that out here, find out where it is properly labeled here on this encoder board, and go ahead and get into it. All right, so we have some additional buttons here. I'm gonna get this plugged in and find out where this is mapped to. Now, I know most controllers, obviously, there should be 4 additional buttons, 1, 2, 3, 4, so maybe it's back here. The other 4 buttons will be the ones where you push in like L1 and L3 and R3, and that's pushing in on the joystick. So, all right, this one's not doing anything. And then of course we have the trigger buttons, which we don't need at all. Let's see where this is. Okay. All right, no response. Now I know where these buttons are properly labeled. I believe these are auto and turbo, clear, and mode. So I want to see what or if they respond accordingly to the Xbox. Okay, I'll pretty much go ahead and leave that there for right now. Turbo, auto. All right, so my additional buttons that I have for this game probably would be labeled back down here. Now, even though I don't need them, just want to see where this encoder board. All right, that's right trigger. So I don't need those. So now I got to figure out where I want to map them directly on this encoder board, and also find out where the start, guide button, and also the back button is going to be on this encoder. Obviously, we know it's not here at the top on the board. So we have right trigger, and then of course this is going to be left trigger.
Now, there is something else I definitely want to point out. You can buy arcade encoder boards that are properly mapped for an Xbox 360 or an Xbox One unit. Unfortunately, the one that I did pick up has some generic labels on them. Can't remember exactly what the input letters are on them, as of right now, but I can tell you, you can find arcade encoders that will have X, Y, L, R, Y, and B on the encoder board, so you can map them directly. On this particular one, well, you have to use the process that I'm using now to kind of figure out where those, particular positions are along the encoder board. They roughly cost about the same price, somewhere about 30 to 35 bucks, and I do believe they also make some specifically for PlayStation as well. The cool thing about using the PlayStation 3, and I can't remember if the PlayStation 4 requires it or not, it doesn't require any type of authentication, so you can plug in pretty much any type of USB encoder or arcade encoder. The PlayStation 3 will take it. However, with the Xbox units, you do need to use decryption, which is again the reason why you need to have two different types of wired controllers in order for them to work. I do have a separate video on the Nintendo Wii and the Nintendo Switch you guys could check out in the playlist. But again, we're almost done here, but I just definitely wanted to point that out, that you can buy encoder boards out there that has the proper Xbox 360 or the Xbox One lettering, so you can map it out that way of your choice. All right, so now we have most of our buttons mapped. So as you guys can see here, we'll follow along with the diagram. We have X, Y, left button, A, B, right button, and then of course we have these two as assigned. So I'm going to go ahead and plug these in, and I'm going to associate these with turbo and clear for my additional buttons. So once that's done, we should be pretty much set and good to go, and we'll play a couple of games and everything will be finalized. Again, you can use the computer to map out the cronuszen, Cronusmax, or your Brooks controller, whatever adaptive controller you want to use. But again, I just wanted to show everyone the manual configuration to assign all of these keys here, because they are not properly, well, they're not labeled as Xbox or PlayStation controllers or inputs. They're just simply labeled as K1, K2, K3, and so forth. So let's go ahead and get this done. All right, fellas, let's give you one last look before we go ahead and get started. Now, remember, I only have one Cronusmax right now. Actually, I have two. I have the other one behind me. But I only have one wired Xbox 360 controller. So remember, you need two if you're going to use a Cronusmax to authenticate, because the wired controller authenticates the device, so another device can be used on the system. So we are going to be using the left side, or I'm sorry, the right side, which we just configured. And so we're using the one Cronusmax here along with one wired Xbox 360 controller for authentication purposes. Now remember, the left side is using the Zenmo controller adapter here. Remember, you can't, this is the one directly with the the Micro Center Atari cabinet, and this doesn't work with consoles because you need to have two different USB type devices that can go into an Xbox 360, a PlayStation 4, in order to authenticate and get it to use. Now remember, this primarily tutorial is made for the Micro Center cabinet because this comes with a Zenmo Tech controller. However, if you are using a regular arcade setup and you're using additional arcade type controllers or encoders, then this should work for you. You wouldn't have to buy something additionally. But remember, the Zenmo Tech allows you to control in or plug in both sides, so it can work here. There, you guys see it. So the Zenmo Tech controller typically allows for two controller setups, but remember, I need two USB ports out so I can hook up two individual sides independently to run into any console. So remember, this works for PlayStation 4, Xbox 360, Xbox One, PlayStation 5, and so forth. So let's go ahead and see if our button configuration took. We'll go ahead and get set up, and we're going to play a little bit of Marvel vs. Capcom 2 and give you guys a little bit of gameplay. I'll turn the volume up just a little bit so it's going to get a little loud.
And then of course, just so you guys can see that the rest of the buttons are hooked up correctly, this is the letter L. That's left, right, left, right. So this is exactly what I wanted to aim for when setting this up. Remember, you can set this up individually if you use the software and pre-program it. You don't have to use the hardware setup, but I wanted to do the hardware setup so that way I know where these buttons are configured automatically for this type of arcade unit. Left, right, and then of course this is A, this is the letter B, so let's hit B. Takes us back. We're gonna hit A again. Let's hit X. It gives us game details. And let's go back again. So this is exactly what we were aiming for before we even get to the game we want to play. But enough with this. Let's go ahead and play some Marvel vs. Capcom 2. All right, so I'm going to check my buttons to make sure all of my settings are correct before we even get started. Light punch, assist. So again, just a quick recap, this is what we were aiming for. So X, Y, left button, A, B, and right button. And you can see that's how everything is configured. In fact, let me go ahead and mess it up a little bit here. Let's go back to default because I want you guys to see this perfect layout. So we have light punch, Y, left button, A, B, perfect setup. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Just so you guys can see some combos. All right, fellas, so that wraps it up. I hope you enjoyed this nice tutorial on how to modify your Micro Center Arcade Atari cabinet using a Xbox 360 or any console for that matter. So this is a relatively short process. And again, the purpose of this was to hardwire the buttons how I wanted them to come out directly on the encoder board and then plug it in directly to the Cronusmax. So this should only take you about a good few minutes. However, you will need to go online and order a separate arcade encoder in order to make this happen. if you want to mod your console with this particular unit, because it doesn't work for both sides using a Zenmo type controller. Now, I do have other video reviews hooking up a PlayStation 4, a Nintendo Wii for full compatibility. I haven't done the full tutorial on the Nintendo Wii. I will post that here in the next few days. But again, guys, hope you enjoyed this tutorial showing you how to hook up your classic Marvel vs. Capcom 2 Xbox 360 using the Micro Center Atari cabinet. This is Keo Daiken. Consider subscribing to all of my additional social media and channels, including Raspberry Pi 4, as well as some other things that I do have. And I'll catch you guys later. So you guys have a good night. Peace. Later.